Hello again, friends, and welcome back to beautiful Spring Lake, Michigan, where I am currently hanging out. I've got my Michigan t-shirt on here. Um, so first and foremost, just want to say thanks to everybody who responded to the first video for all the kind words and support, and some of you even asked me to do it again, so here we find ourselves. Thanks also for those who offered suggestions for improvement, much needed, and I'll try to do better this time. But I'm just going to be tasting another whiskey and having some fun with it. So without further ado, I can show you what we've got on deck here today. This is the Old Granddad Bottled in Bond. Who is Old Granddad? Whose granddad is it? We're going to find out. So this, you can see there's a photo of the gentleman here. That is a name that might be familiar to those of you bourbon drinkers out there. That is Meredith Basil Hayden Sr., who is also the namesake of the Basil Hayden's brand in the Jim Beam small batch portfolio. Basil himself was an emigre from Maryland. He went to Kentucky in the late 1700s, and he brought some of that Maryland distilling knowledge, state famous for rye. And indeed, he was said to have a preference for a high rye mash bill, which carries on to this day. But we'll talk a little bit about that more later. So he did not start this brand. This brand was established to honor him by his grandson Raymond, who started his own distillery in the late 1800s. He wanted to memorialize Basil Hayden, so he created this Old Granddad label. Raymond himself did not have any kids. He had no heirs, and so the Wathans ended up owning the distillery around the turn of the 20th century. They had such success with the brand by that time that they called it the Old Granddad Distillery. That a year later burned to the ground, and then they rebuilt it, and then that went on for another 19 years until Prohibition started, and so they shuttered it. And then eventually destroyed it. So the brand carried on though. So they transferred the brand to the American Medicinal Spirits Company, which then through a series of mergers became National Distillers Products, and then they sold out to Jim Beam in 1987. So Beam Suntory owns the brand now, and they produce it at their plants in Claremont, Kentucky, as well as in Boston, Kentucky. And again, just in keeping with the preference or the reputed preference of Basil Hayden, this has a high rye mash bill. So you're talking about 30% potentially. And this is, could be divisive. So some people like the high rye. I typically am not a fan. I'm not really in love with like the floral roses profiles as much, and can be a little off-putting for me sometimes in a bourbon whiskey. So we'll see how this does. But I've tried the top of the line Old Grandad, which is the 114 proof offering, and that's just they just call that 114. So this sits in the middle. There's a 43% bottling at the kind of the low end bottom shelf. But then there's also this bottled in bond, 100 proof. And maybe some of you guys aren't familiar with the bottled in bond designation, so I'm just going to do a real brief history recap here before we get into the fun part. But there was an act passed in 1897, a law called the Bottled in Bond Act, which is aimed at reforming some of the bad practices in the whiskey industry. I'm not going to go through the specifics, but what it means for us in terms of modern day drinkers and what we would pull off the shelf of the supermarket is that you're getting a whiskey that you know is at least 4 years old. You know it comes from a single distillery, so it's not a blend, and you know it's going to be bottled at 50% ABV. And you've got good representation of the big Kentucky distilleries in this category. So Heaven Hill has Evan Williams Bottled in Bond, which is one of my personal favorites, as well as the Henry McKenna single barrel. That's a 10-year-old Bottled in Bond, which is increasingly hard to get your hands on. And then they recently re-released the Heaven Hill Bottled in Bond, which is a 7-year-old. Sazerac has bottled and bond whiskeys from both Buffalo Trace in the form of the E.H. Taylor, as well as Barton 1792 in terms of very old Barton, although they've recently dropped the bottled and bond designation on that, I understand, as well as the 1792 bottled and bond. Probably something would have caught your attention recently. The Wild Turkey Distillery released a 17-year-old bottled and bond in their Master's Keep line. A lot of fanfare around that online. I had a chance to taste it. I loved it. I've been sending out samples to all my friends and just trying to spread that one around as much as possible. Old Forester has a bottled and bond expression, and then you get around to Beam. So Beam has a Jim Beam bottled and bond as well as this Old Granddad, and so that kind of brings us to where we are. So this is a whiskey that I'm interested to try here. Let's to go through our normal. You can see the color here. So it's a kind of a pale gold, medium pale gold. I don't expect this to be super aged. I would expect this to be kind of just above that 4-year mark. It sits. I think you can find this in the kind of the low to mid $20 per bottle range. So that's kind of what you're dealing with here. Um, so just gonna give this a nose here and see what we think. Yeah, you're definitely getting that rye. It's got a very kind of steely, very kind of hard edged note to it. There's also like a little bit of mint leaf, maybe some very very fresh spearmint, and there is a corniness to it. There is that kind of milky sweetness that I get almost like grits, but yeah, good balance against the rye and the mash bill here. Nice kind of gentle wave of vanilla. Sometimes with Kentucky Straight Bourbon whiskey, you can get like an overwhelming kind of like a wave of oak, and just really kind of like a sickly sweet vanilla. But this has a vanilla note and an oak note, but it's pretty well integrated. Just gonna give the nose a break here for a second. To the extent that I'm told you're not meant to swirl in a glass, but I've got like this bad habit left over from wine tasting where I'm always trying to aerate it. So I know it doesn't help, but I just consider it a nervous tick at this point. I'm getting some. I don't. You can please feel free to comment. And let me know if I'm alone in this, but I often get like a aloe vera or like a really green kind of stalky note from either rye whiskey or whiskey with a lot of rye in the mash bill, and I'm getting a little bit of that here. Yeah. So on the nose, it's interesting. It's got enough stuff to make me want to sip it and hold my interest for a moment here. So. Um, just based on the nose alone, I'm positively predisposed. But again, I'm gonna be thinking about that rye in the mash bill, and are they able to integrate that harmoniously, or does it lapse over into this very kind of like bitter, hard edged rye dominant flavor? So we're gonna see the hard way. So mm, again, just like letting it just kind of sit on my lips like a little whiskey lip gloss there, just letting it kind of sit on my lips. It's not, from sometimes it jumps right into your mouth, and this is not immediately expressive in that way. But getting like a very like a little floral kiss. There's kind of like a little rose or like those dew dampened spring flowers. Just a really nice fresh note on the front of this, which is fun. So here we go. I'm gonna take the plunge and swish this around in the mouth. So yeah, yeah. So I just maybe I think a mistake a lot of reviewers make is that they focus too much on flavor, and it's you got of course you have to talk about flavor, but for me the texture of a whiskey is really important, and it's part of what just beyond whatever you're tasting in a superficial way. It's part of what continues to engage me intellectually about whatever's in my mouth at a given point in time. So I'm gonna talk a lot about the texture here. Mm. So at the front of the tongue, I get peanuts, which is something I get from a lot of the Beam whiskeys. Just this kind of very like I mean your standard ballpark bag of salted peanuts. Mm, mm. This has a nice kind of a rounded fruity woodiness in the middle of the palate. That's I think the best note for me is that you've got this it's like almost like a very rich like a Meyer lemon, and then there's a gentle wood accent with that. There's good interplay between the two. Mm. And then on the finish, this does have a little bit of the rye bitterness. Maybe at the very top of the tongue, there's like a small amount of that sensation, but it's not. With the 114, it had really like lapsed over into this really stiff, really really bitter, really sharp rye flavor, and I'm not getting that. So this in that regard, this is an improvement. That said, I'm not getting a ton of flavor out of this. If I really reach hard, like kind of around the sides of the mouth, there's the note of so my dad growing up always had like one of those big racks of Big Red chewing gum, one of those huge packs of it in the car, and he used to like to chew that. So I would sit in the front seat and chew that Big Red chewing gum, and so that it's nice reminiscence of dad in there. There's a little bit of that kind of cinnamon chewing gum flavor. Um, this doesn't really linger. I mean, it turns kind of mute, and there's a steely note, and then it just quiets down a whole ton on the back of the palate. So what do I have to say about this? I think I paid $25, so it's not bad whiskey for $25. The problem is that it's got such stiff competition, and particularly what makes the Evan Williams Bottled and Bond a favorite is that for me it's 15 or 17 or even $20, but it's got amazing flavor. It's got great complexity. It's complete. It doesn't have any off notes. There's no points at which I feel like it's really lacking. It's just really good throughout, and it allows you to sip it and enjoy it neat, but you can also just throw it in a Manhattan or throw it in an old fashioned and not feel too bad about it because you paid 20 bucks for the stuff. So that's really the pinnacle of Bottled and Bond. This is not bad. I could see this more as a mixer, and particularly like if you had a cocktail where you had some more sweet flavors. So like for example, I make my Manhattans with Amaro, which can be more herbaceous and more bitter or more sweet depending on the style you get. And the high rye in this mash bill really gives us an edge that might help cut through that. Or I don't know if you make your old fashions on the sweeter side. So would I be a repeat purchaser of this? I mean, probably not for everyday use. Again, I tend to go back to my old standby, the Evan Williams Bottled and Bond, but I'm happy to have tried this. I think it's for my taste. I think I like this better than the 114, but horses for courses. And if any of you guys have tried it and have any opinions of your own, I'd be happy to hear about them. So please share them and leave comments. And just again, really wanted to say thank you to everybody who have been so incredibly supportive and such positive feedback on this. It's like I said, the first time that I did this. Last time, so this is the second one. So hopefully incremental improvement. But if you keep liking them, I'll keep doing them. So. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Otherwise, please check out the rest of my reviews and things on www.malt-review.com. That's where you can find me. But in the meantime, really appreciate you guys sharing a couple minutes with me, and we'll see you next time. So, cheers.